Apparently, the Prime Minister was sitting directly opposite him at the opening session of the summit, and used it to deliver a fairly punchy message about the barbaric war in Ukraine, and saying that one thing that would transform the global economy is if Putin pulled out, and jibing at Putin for not turning up himself.
Let's get the latest from Bali, where world leaders are meeting at the G20. Chris Smyth is the Times Whitehall editor, and he's there with the Prime Minister. Good morning to you, Chris.
Good morning, Steve.
What's Rishi Sunak been doing today?
So the main news from here, as far as Rishi Sunak is concerned, is his face-to-face condemnation of Russia for the first time. You may have seen pictures out this morning of him glowering at Sergei Lavrov, President Putin's foreign minister. Apparently, the Prime Minister was sitting directly opposite him at the opening session of the summit, and used it to deliver a fairly punchy message about the barbaric war in Ukraine, and saying that one thing that would transform the global economy is if Putin pulled out, and jibing at Putin for not turning up himself. So that has been the main action today, and obviously other world leaders delivering similar messages. And Lavrov having to sit through them, and an address from President Zelensky, who spoke virtually.
Xi Jinping is there. He met Joe Biden. He's meeting Anthony Albanese from Australia. I suppose one critical question for the world is, if China could be shifted off support for Russia, that would be hugely significant. Is there much politicking going on to that end, do you think?
Yes, there is. I mean, it was something that was discussed with President Biden in his meeting, a very long meeting with President Xi yesterday. Other world leaders will be making similar points. So far, nothing in the diary with Rishi Sunak, but they haven't given up hope of some kind of meeting. And that is the tricky balance has to be struck with China. With Russia, it's very straightforward. They condemn the war in Ukraine, but with China, there's lots of things that we want to call them out on and criticize them for, but at the same time, we're asking for their help on quite a lot of things, not least Ukraine, trying to get them to soften their support for Russia. That could be crucial, as well as a huge range of other issues, economic, energy, and climate. So it is a much more difficult and tricky relationship with China.
And we saw that a bit, didn't we? Rishi Sunak was being asked, because in the leadership campaign, both he and Truss tried to outcompete each other with how much they could condemn China. They said, I think Rishi Sunak's position was China was considered a threat in the same way that Russia's considered a threat. But there's just the beginnings of a hint they might be rowing back from that maybe he has to be a bit more nuanced towards China.
Yes, exactly. Now, his team downplay that and say, well, not really much difference between a threat and a challenge. But it is quite striking that he is not repeating some of the more inflammatory language he used in the summit, like China big bullying and rigging the global economy, stealing trade secrets, all that kind of stuff. He's not doing that. He is trying to stay aligned with the language in the technocratic official documents. And yes, some on the right of his party are going to be cross with him for that, because there are the China hawks don't like it. They want a tougher line. But I think he has recognised they need both to stay in the same aligned to use the same language as other Western countries, and also the blunt fact that there's stuff that we need from China. And so deliberately antagonising them is a bad way to go about getting it.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, Chris. Good to speak to you as ever. Thank you so much for joining us. That's Chris Smyth there, Times Whitehall editor. And you can see on the front of the Times, actually, the picture of Xi Jinping and Joe Biden grinning together, in the sense that there may be slightly more warmth than otherwise expected.
Do you know, the thing that really struck me about that, and then the video footage of it as well, is I can't think of a time that I've seen President Xi not wearing a mask to meet somebody with in 3 years, and particularly not somebody that's not been put in court, because they used to quarantine journalists for a fortnight before they could even come in and cover some of the stuff that the administration was doing. So it was clearly a big show of respect from him to do that. So
and the noise that came out were warmer than people expected, I think, weren't they?
I think they were.